Okay, good morning everyone. It is 9 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started with the webinar. Looks like we've got most people in attendance. So first, just thank you everyone for taking some time today to join us and to learn the new rules of handicapping under the World Handicapping System. I'm sure most everyone has already been exposed to it in some form or another, whether it's looking at your changed handicap index or course handicap, so forth, or maybe you've already browsed and read through the rule book a little bit. But we're going to do a deep dive today and get into all of the nuts and bolts of the World Handicap System so you can either learn to help your members if you're a PGA pro, or if you are serving on the handicap committee or handicap chairman at your club, get certified under WHS for your club. So with that said, we'll go ahead and jump in. I am Nate Schroeder. I'm the Director of Handicapping and Course Rating with Washington Golf. We've also got Collin Westwood here today. Collin is the Manager of Handicapping Engine Services here at Washington Golf, and we'll be going back and forth a little bit. Just a quick ground rules before we get started. Everybody should be muted, so you are unable to speak with us, but there is a chat function. And if you have questions as we go throughout, type your questions into the chat, and Collin will respond as best he can to answer you as we're going through, but we'll also have some slides for some of the more in-depth questions where we pause, take a break, and answer your questions at those slides. Okay, so we'll go ahead and jump in. As we go through, you'll see we are following the rule book. We won't cover every single rule section, but we will go in order through the book, starting with the purpose, ending with committee actions, and covering some of the information in the appendices as well. So if you have a copy of the rules book, you can follow along. Everybody should have been emailed a PDF version. We will be mailing you out a hard copy of the rules of handicapping as well. So for now, if you want to follow along on the PDF, otherwise we have put rule number references on each slide as well, so you'll know where to go into your book and find the full rules later on. So first, a little background on how we came to the World Handicap System. You can see from this slide here, there were many handicapping systems in place throughout the world. The USGA Handicap System and the European Golf Association Handicap System obviously being the big ones. See in red there is all the countries that were using the USGA Handicap System. And ultimately, through a collaborative process of all these 6 major national governing bodies of handicapping, they were able to come together and come up with one set of rules that is universal now throughout the world. All handicap indexes are going to be calculated according to the same criteria. The USGA course rating system is going to be implemented in any of the countries that have not previously adopted it. So you may have heard some reports in the news when this first started. Other countries were waiting to adopt the World Handicap System. Well, that wasn't the case. The countries who haven't fully adopted or haven't been able to fully implement the system, would be more accurate, is because they're needing the time to get all of their golf courses rated. So they're not able to implement the system until they are able to get their teams out and to get every golf course rated. So everyone is fully on board. It is a World Handicap System, and despite what you may have heard elsewhere, it is either fully implemented or going to be fully implemented as soon as the course rating process is finished throughout the entire world. So here's just the 6 systems into one. Your handicap index now is portable. World Handicap is unified. All the major governing bodies around the world and anywhere you go, you'll be able to bring your handicap going forward. So starting into the rule book here, Rule 1.1, purpose of the World Handicap System, real brief here. Obviously, it's to obtain and maintain a handicap index that can be transported around the world, so you're able to compete recreationally with anyone on a fair basis. The system is meant to be inclusive, portable, and consistent no matter where it's applied. A little bit of the structure here and governance with the World Handicap System. This is Rule 1.3. As I said before, one handicap system to be consistent, and all those major national governing bodies I talked about. And now you can see here the World Handicap System has been implemented in the government structure by the USGA and the RNA, similar to the rules of golf, the rules of amateur status, and the equipment rules. Prior to 2020, those first three, the rules of golf, amateur status, and the equipment rules, were all governed jointly by the USGA and RNA, and there was one global set of rules for those three areas, but World Handicap System was missing. So with that now, the USGA and the RNA are going to oversee the World Handicap System, much like they do the other major aspects of the game of golf. So that's our top level of the hierarchy here. Here in the United States, the National Association level, that is just the USGA. So in other areas, say Golf Canada, for example, that next level of governance in the hierarchy would be Golf Canada. Here we skip right down to the Allied Golf Association, which is Washington Golf. So these are regional golf association. We have specific responsibilities within the World Handicap System as delegated to us by the USGA. We are an Allied Golf Association made up of member clubs and members throughout Washington and northern Idaho. So moving down the next level, that's you at your golf club here, or you on the handicap committee, affiliated, obviously I said member clubs of Washington Golf. You're responsible for ensuring the handicaps of your members administered in accordance with the requirements of the rules of handicapping. We'll get into those details a little bit later and what your handicap committee responsibilities are, how you oversee and how you review the handicaps of your members to make sure that they are being administered in accordance with the World Handicap System. And then the lowest level here in the hierarchy is the player, and the player's responsibility is to attempt to make the best score possible at each hole, submit their scores for handicap purposes as soon as possible, and to submit them in accordance with the rules of handicapping. The full rights and responsibilities of each one of these members is found in Appendix A in the rules of handicapping. That's not something we will cover in depth today, but I would encourage you certainly to look through Appendix A when you get a chance. So who issues the handicap index? In order to use it, the association must be authorized by the USGA and the RNA. Our responsibility is to use the rules of handicapping in the course rating system. All golf courses with a course and slope rating in our territory have been rated by Washington Golf and by our trained rating team. We are licensed to use registered trademarks of the World Handicap System and to issue handicaps where delegated through our golf clubs. We do not issue any handicaps directly. We issue all of our handicaps through our golf clubs. So new in the World Handicap System is the designation of a home club. This is Rule 1.4b. So every player has a home club designated with their handicap. So if you are only a member of one club, it's real simple. That's going to be your home club. That club is going to be responsible for oversight of your handicap index. For players who, many of you out there have multiple memberships, you will need to have one club designated as your home club. That club should be the one where you play the majority of your golf. If you are a member of multiple clubs and handicap issues arise, the clubs should be working together in any of these handicap related matters. If you are, say, somebody who is a snowbird, you spend 6 months up here in Washington, 6 months down in California or Arizona, you are able to, and you should, change the designation of your home club when you make that move for the year. If you have one primary club at a facility and you are, say, a member of a Type 2 club or a club that is not associated with the facility, you want your home club to be designated as that club that is at a facility where you are playing the majority of your golf. And to switch your home club, you just need to contact Washington Golf. We can make that switch for you. And again, like I said, anytime handicapping issues come up, the clubs are going to want to work together on that player's handicap issues. So our acceptabilities of scores here is Rule 2.1. These are scores that are allowed to be submitted under the rules of handicapping. So first are going to be scores from an authorized format of play, which meets all the provisions set out in the rules of handicapping. So there are certain formats of play that are obviously not acceptable under the rules of handicapping. If you're in a foursome match, if you're in a scramble, there's obviously clear reasons there why you would not be able to submit that score for handicapping. But scores that are played in an accepted format of play and played under the rules of handicapping should be submitted. That includes both match play and stroke play scores, including multi-ball team competitions where you have picked up, say, a four-ball competition where you've been out of contention of the hole. If your player or if your partner completes a hole, you can't beat his score, you pick up. Those formats of play when you're playing your own golf ball throughout the whole round should be posted for handicap purposes, and they are acceptable. Obviously, all scores on courses with the current course rating and slope rating made during the active season, both home and away. Here in Washington, we observe the inactive season between November 15th and the last day of February. That has not changed under World Handicapping System, or excuse me, under the World Handicap System. So any scores played in Washington right now would not be postable for handicap purposes. So scores made under the rules of golf or the modified rules of golf for players with disability. Obviously, when you play, you do need to play under the rules. You need to be accompanied by at least one other person still. That person does not need to be playing with you, but somebody who can act as a marker, who was there throughout your round that can verify your score. And that includes when you follow a model local rule, even if the committee has not adopted it. So alternative option for stroke and distance, that was added last year when the new rules of golf came out. So, you know, whether or not you're playing a golf course that has that local rule adopted on their course scorecard, if you decide to use it, that round should still be posted for handicapping purposes. Same with preferred lies. If you're out playing in early March and course is still wet, whether or not a golf course has a sign posted that says, you know, play winter rules or play preferred lies, if you choose to do so, you still want to post that round for handicapping purposes. Let's take a look at some unacceptable scores here. Obviously, as I mentioned, foursome or alternate shots, not acceptable. Any kind of scramble would not be acceptable. And a score where you've been disqualified in a competition for a breach of the rules that could have provided you with a significant advantage. So if you use a non-conforming club, or something along those lines. If you play around with 15 clubs in your bag, you use 15 clubs or more, you're not going to want to post that score, because that's not against or it's not acceptable for handicap purposes. If you happen to be playing in a competition and say you forget to sign your scorecard and you are disqualified for that reason, that score can still be posted because you did not gain a significant advantage in the rules of golf. And lastly there, if you're playing and being coached, so if you're a part of a playing lesson, obviously in that situation you're gaining advice that'd be against the rules of golf, and that score would not be acceptable for handicap purposes to be posted. Some situations here where you play less than 18 holes or less than 9 holes, those scores we still want to have posted, provided you play at least 14 holes to post an 18-hole score, or at least 7 holes to post a 9-hole score. So that is a change from the previous system. Prior it was 13 holes would be acceptable for an 18-hole score, so you need to play one more now. And for any holes you don't play, say you quit right at 14, for those remaining holes, you would post par plus any net strokes that you would receive, so net par for those remaining holes. This has got a new term under World Handicap System, but the process is the same. So prior it was referred to as par plus, now it's referred to as net par, but the process is the exact same. You just look at those holes that you did not play, calculate your net par for those holes, and that should be your adjusted gross score that you post. Same thing goes for a 9-hole score. You just need to reach that minimum of 7 holes to be able to post your 9-hole score. And a hole is deemed to have been played if the hole has been started. So we will cover that a little bit later, your most likely score. So if you tee off on the 14th hole and the rain starts pouring in, you get a downpour, lightning, something along those lines, or for whatever reason you have to end your round after teeing off on the 14th hole, you've started that hole, that hole is deemed to have been played, and you'll take your most likely score for that 14th hole, and then for the remaining holes that you did not play, you would use the net par for posting purposes. All right, maximum score for handicap purposes. So this referred to as net double bogey. This is a pretty significant change to golfers here in the U.S. From the previous equitable stroke control process that we used for maximum hole. So at any point, the maximum score you can take is going to be net double bogey. This is really all about eliminating those huge blow-up holes that everybody has that can throw off, the accuracy of your handicap index. Everybody runs into that situation every now and then. It happens. You make a 10 or 11, you hit it in the water a couple times. Say you just don't finish the hole, and your score balloons. This is meant to curb that and to be a more accurate reflection of your capabilities as a player. So let's take a look at how this works. Your net double bogey is going to always be par plus 2 plus any handicap strokes received or given on a hole. So when you're posting, and really before you play, you should always know your course handicap, and you're going to want to take a look at the scorecard, see where you receive holes throughout the round based on the stroke allocation. And anytime you exceed that net double bogey, you're just going to reduce it. So in this situation here, we have a par 4, take 2 strokes to get to net double bogey. The player here's course handicap of 11, so they receive a stroke in the first 11 holes. The par 4 hole here has a stroke index of 6, so they receive 1 stroke. Par plus the 2 strokes plus 1 stroke receives means maximum of 7. So if the player makes anything higher than 7, when they go to post that round, they should reduce that in their adjusted gross score. One feature, I don't know if we have it specifically listed out in this presentation. I saw a question come in on it. A new feature of the GIN software is the ability to post hole by hole. So anytime you do this, the GIN software will automatically calculate your net double bogey for you. It is going to be very quick, easy process to post your hole by hole score. It's what is recommended under World Handicap System. It's not a requirement, but we encourage everyone to start posting your whole scores hole by hole. And a big part of that reason is that this net double bogey maximum hole score process is done for you. So let's take a look at an example of a player here. You can see it's really easy when you're an 18 course handicap. You get one stroke on every hole. This player here on the 17th hole, par 4, stroke index is 6. She got a stroke. She makes an 8. It goes down one stroke to a 7. So the score for the competition she played was 95, but when she goes to post that score, she takes that net double bogey, and that 95 becomes a 94. So pretty straightforward process, but it does require that you know your course handicap and that you look at the stroke index allocation. So obviously, like I said, the hole by hole score posting takes care of that. But if you are going to post your 18 hole score, your 9 hole score, you need to make sure you're paying attention. When you go to post, look at your score, see if you exceeded that net double bogey anywhere, and make the proper adjustments when you go to post for handicap purposes. If you are a club that uses the Golf Genius or USGA tournament management software, this has been updated, and when you post, just like it did prior with ESC, the proper adjustments for the application of net double bogey will be made when you post from the Golf Genius software. I just saw a question pick up too. So if you're playing a casual round, the recommendation is to pick up after you've reached net double bogey. That's for pace of play purposes, because that will be the score you need to take. So once you've hit your net double bogey, go ahead and pick up, move on to the next hole. Depending upon your format of play, if you're in a competition, you may be required to hole out. So always keep that in mind. But if it's just a casual round and you've reached your net double bogey, you're free to go ahead and pick up. Encourage you to do so. If it's a Stableford competition where you're no longer going to receive any points, same thing there. Go ahead and pick up and move on. But if you are playing in a competition where you're required to hole out, just a stroke play competition, make sure you are holing out for your gross score and to be playing under the rules of golf for that competition. So hole not played, we already covered that here with net par. That also goes for a hole that's declared out of play for maintenance purposes. So if, whatever reason hole's being worked on, you just use net par there as well. Guidelines for your most likely score. So for the first time here in Rule 3.3, there is some more guidance offered on what your most likely score should be if you start a hole and do not complete it. These, again, are guidelines, so it is always treated on a case-by-case basis, what your most likely score could be. It depends upon the position of the golf ball, the difficulty of, say, the hole location or the green, and also the skill of the player are all things that you're going to want to consider when you look at most likely score. So here are guidelines. If you're on the putting green within 5 feet of the hole, you're usually just going to add one additional stroke. Again, like I said, you need to factor in all aspects. So if you are right at 5 feet away, but you have a severe downhill putt with 1.5 feet of break, and you need to take a look at, what you truly think your most likely score based on your skill would be. So as you move a little further away, 5 feet to 20 yards from the hole, most likely going to be 2 or 3 additional strokes. Again, that depends upon the position of the ball, difficulty of the green, and the ability of the player. If you're short-sided, hitting a chip over a bunker, maybe that leans when you go towards 3 strokes as opposed to 2. And as you back up even further, so beyond 20 yards from the hole, it's going to be 3 or 4 additional strokes. Kind of those same guidelines there as well. Always depends upon skill of the player, difficulty of the green, and the position of the golf ball. Say what you need to go over, what's in your way, type of shot you need to hit. All those things need to be considered. But if you use these basic guidelines for how many strokes when you pick up on a hole, you should be able to figure out a pretty reasonable most likely score and be able to post that for handicapping purposes. I saw Joe's question here, used for tournament play also. Again, if you're in a competition, if you're just playing stroke play, you are required under the rules of golf to hole out on every hole. So you would not be able to use most likely score and still compete in that competition if you did, for whatever reason, decide to pick up and you're okay with being disqualified but continue to play the round. In that case, you would still use most likely score. But the provisions here in the rules of handicapping don't override the rules of golf in any way when it comes to stroke play competition. So when you're required to hole out under the rules of golf to stay in the competition, you need to do so. This is going to be used most heavily if you're in a casual round and need to pick up for some reason. If you're in match play and your opponent's already made a better score, won the hole, and you are unable to beat their score, you may just pick up, save time, move on to the next hole. Same goes for a 4-ball or best ball competition. If your partner's already holed out with a lower score than you can make, you don't need to continue to play the hole because you've already established your team score. But we still want those scores to be posted for handicapping purposes. So these guidelines will help you get to your most likely score in all of those scenarios. Rule 4.3. This is the time frame for submitting a score. I think everybody knows now that handicap indexes revise daily. So the players should be submitting their score as soon as possible on the day of play, preferably before midnight local time. If you don't submit your score by midnight local time on that day, you can certainly still go back and post it the next day, but it won't factor into the playing conditions calculation, which we'll get to later, and your index obviously won't revise unless that score is posted on that day. So you have to wait another 24-hour cycle there for your score to post if you wait to the next day to post it, or if you wait even longer to post it, you won't be revised obviously until you post a score. So a little bit more emphasis now on posting after you play. It's no different than the USGA handicap system. You are always encouraged and always recommended to post on the day that you play. But in the old system, if you didn't post that day, it didn't really have an effect until it came time for a revision on the 1st and 15th. Well, now with those revisions happening every day, obviously you want to get those scores in so they are, your handicap is up to date and as accurate as can be. So we'll cover, like I said, the playing conditions calculation a little bit later, and some of the effects that the time frame for posting your score has on that PCC. Minimum number of scores to obtain a handicap index. This is rule 4.5. So quite simply, any combination of 54 holes, whether that's 9-hole or 18-hole rounds. This is a change from the USGA handicap system. That was 5 18-hole scores before index can be issued. So now it's 54. There's no time limit on completing the submission of these scores. So if you are a new player who's just got a handicap index or GIN number for the first time, however long it takes you to get those 54 hole scores, 54 holes posted, that's when you first get your handicap index calculated. Again, here it's strongly recommended that a player's initial scores are posted hole by hole, so to get a better assessment of the potential of the player. Treatment of 9-hole scores, they are going to be combined. This is the same as under the USGA handicap system, so there's no change here. If you post a 9-hole score, it will remain in your scoring record until another 9-hole score is posted, and then those two scores will be combined to become an 18-hole score. Handicap index calculation. So rule 5, this is a big one. The next couple things we cover here really through the end of this webinar are kind of the nuts and bolts of the World Handicap System and Handicap Index. So we'll have a couple pauses here for questions as we go through, because we're going to get into some topics that are a little more involved than what we've covered so far. So starting with the handicap index calculation, 5 significant changes. Well, it says coming in 2020, but they're already here. As we spoke about, the minimum number of scores required goes from 5 to 3. When you're calculating your handicap index, the number of differentials used goes from 10 out of your most recent 20 with a multiplier for excellence. That is removed, and now it's just a straight average of 8 out of your low 8 of your 20 most recent score differentials. The playing conditions calculation that I mentioned is a part of the handicap index, and we'll cover that in detail. Exceptional score reductions considers all scores. Again, we'll cover this in detail, but it's no longer just tournament scores that are factored in when it comes to a reduction of a handicap index. And lastly, the addition of a soft cap and a hard cap that limits the upward movement of your handicap index. Again, all things that we will cover in detail, but they are all significant changes to the handicap index calculation and things that are important when looking at a handicap index going forward. So the calculation of a score differential. The only change you see here is that PCC adjustment. The formula before that remains the same. It's still 113 divided by the slope rating multiplied by your adjusted gross score minus a course rating, and now minus that PCC adjustment. Again, the PCC adjustment we'll cover in detail. That is a calculation that is done by the USGA. The logarithm they use to calculate the PCC is not published anywhere, and the data that goes into that is not something that's made available to you as the golfer or your golf club, or even Washington Golf on the AGA level. You will be able to see when a PCC adjustment was applied. You'll be able to see what that adjustment was, who was affected. You just won't be able to see the actual logarithm used to calculate whether or not that PCC adjustment needed to be applied. So let's take a look at an example here of a score differential. This is no different than before, where sometimes your lowest score may not always produce your lowest score differential. So that's to say, your 95 in this case, or 97, is not going to be the same on each course. So in this example here, the player's score of 95 on a golf course with a 71.5 rating, slope of 125, ends up with the score differential of 21.2. The next score posted with 97, course rating 73.8, and a slope rating of 140 produces a lower differential there of 18.7. And the lowest score out of the three that they shot, 90, was on a golf course with a 66.1 rating and a 105 slope. Those low numbers there produce a 25.7 scoring differential. So it is always important to look at the course rating, the slope, and that is what really determines your score differential. It's not always just your overall gross score. So again, not a new concept here, but something that always is worth keeping in mind. So we talked about a little bit earlier about the number of scores needed to calculate a handicap index, being 54. This table here shows how what adjustments are made when a player has less than 20 scores in their scoring record. So once you get to 20 full scores, then it is just your handicap index will be calculated straight off the lowest 8 of your 20 most recent score differentials. But as a player who has just either joined the game or started keeping a handicap for the first time, as they get to those 20 scores, there are adjustments that need to be made for the accuracy of their handicap index. So the first column there, when they get their initial handicap index with 3 scores, their handicap index is just going to be their lowest score minus a 2.0 stroke adjustment. With their 4 score added, it's still going to be their lowest score, but it's going to be a 1 stroke adjustment. When they get to their 5th score, it's just their lowest score differential will be their handicap index. And you can see as you move forward from that point on, the 6th score will lose a 1 stroke adjustment, and then from that point forward, there are no more stroke adjustments. It's just a matter of how many scores are averaged to get their handicap index to work all the way up to the lowest 8. Done for a couple reasons. Obviously, with limited scoring information available, the downward adjustment is necessary to project the player's ability. Players typically play to their ability 1 out of every 5 rounds. So when only 3 scores exist, it's possible the player just hasn't played to their potential yet. Also, the adjustment takes place as a safeguard. Since we're using less data to calculate the player's handicap index, we want to be sure to protect the field whose handicaps are being calculated from a full scoring record. So those are the reasons there. This table can be found in the book if you ever need to reference it. If you're looking at a player's scoring record on GIN, you'll be able to see that as well, that the adjustments being made. For reference, this table is on page 50 if you need to go back and find it. Okay, so calculation of the handicap index, as I mentioned, lowest date, the 20 most recent, is still rounded to the nearest 10th. So you'll still see 1.1, 2.2, so on, as that. No difference than before. And as everybody's seen, if you've already taken a look at your handicap index, it's changed, it's been recalculated. Change is probably not the right way to say it. It's been recalculated. That didn't necessarily mean a change for everyone. On January 6th, when the new GIN software launched, everybody was subject to a revision for the first time. The majority of players saw their handicap index move less than 1 stroke, so maybe a couple tenths for most people, and it was based on everybody's individual scoring record, whether that went up or down. So you can see in this example here, under the USGA handicap system, This player was a 12.9. They kicked out the two highest scores and got rid of the bonus for excellence that was in the USGA handicap system. And now with just a calculation of their lowest 8 out of 20, they were recalculated to a 13.3 under the World Handicap System. So this was a pretty common change that most people saw on January 6th when they got their new handicap index. But as I mentioned, it wasn't necessarily a change for everyone. Some people just, the recalculation produced the same index as before. New under World Handicap System is the maximum handicap index of 54.0. Previously, it was 36.0 for men, or excuse me, 36.4 for men and 40.4 for women. Now it is 54.0 for everyone, both men and women. Main reason for this, just to be inclusive and accessible as possible, and to make it easy for everyone to obtain and maintain their handicap index. The USGA and RNA felt like with a limit at where they were, it ruled out some people who were playing golf regularly, and maybe some people who would feel intimidated that they weren't able to reach those levels. So it really just speaks to the inclusivity and the focus of trying to keep people just having more fun playing golf, but also being able to track their progress as a player. Rule 5.4 here is daily revisions, as I mentioned earlier. So anytime you post a score now, your handicap will be updated the following day. That does take place at midnight local time of your home club. So you need to keep that in mind if, say, you're going further west, if you're traveling to Hawaii, or if you go overseas somewhere, your handicap index will recalculate at local time based on what your home club is set at. So we have the benefit, if you do go east, being here on the West Coast, you get a couple extra hours from East Coast time to post that score. But just keep that in mind when you're posting. So obviously you want to submit that score as soon as possible after the round, but definitely before midnight. This ensures that your score will be counted in the playing conditions calculation. We'll speak a little bit later as well when it comes to multi-day competitions and what that does with your handicap index. But when you are in multi-day competitions, it's going to be up to the committee to ensure that handicap indexes are not updated between rounds. So that is not a worry. If you're at your committee, you aren't going to need to recalculate handicap indexes every day. When you update your handicap index on, say, the Golf Genius software, you can choose which date to have that index revised at. But you still will want to post those scores on the day they are played for the reasons of PCC calculation. Again, also just mention quick, it's not updated in real time. So if you play 36 holes in a day and you post your round, your score after your morning round, your index is not going to revise before you play your second 18 in the afternoon. It is a daily revision. You can post multiple scores on the day if you play more than one, but you won't get revised as soon as you post a score. It will be the following day. Okay, so let's take a little bit deeper dive here into the playing conditions calculation. First thing I just want to say on it is there's a misconception out there, I think, and of course this photo on the screen right now doesn't do much to quell that, but it is not a weather calculation. There are no weather measurements taken. It doesn't look at temperature that day. It doesn't look at wind or rain or anything like that. It simply just looks at expected score versus actual score for anyone that posted a round from any set of tees on a golf course on that given day. So the adjustment here, the range is -1 to +3 on your scoring differential. It is going to be simple and conservative. It'll always appear with the whole number there. It won't ever be a tenth of a stroke or half a stroke or anything like that. And it will be applied just once a day. And you'll see on your scoring record if a PCC was applied. There will also be a report you can run at the club level to show if there was a PCC applied and who was all affected on that day. So the reasons for this, I think, are quite obvious. Anybody who's played in difficult conditions, high wind or rain, or say if you go out and you play a day where the hole locations are particularly difficult. Maybe you have a lot of courses like to do the U.S. Open Day or the Superintendent's Revenge, that kind of thing, where the golf course just has a much more difficult setup than on a typical day. That's what this PCC is meant to calculate. It's meant to account for that, and it's going to adjust your score differentials to better reflect your player's actual performance. Like I said, it will be clearly identified for transparency, and the calculation is automatic through the computation service. So all you need to do is post your score the day of at the club, and the data will do the rest. Look at the next slide here, kind of bringing a couple of details in. So in order for a PCC to be applied, there needs to be at least 8 scores posted on that day. They need to be submitted by players with the handicap index of 36.0 or below. The rationale here is players above 36.0 just have too much volatility in their scores, and we don't want to throw off the accuracy of the PCC. With some of the players, I typically see a higher range of scores, and it will include both 9-hole and 18-hole acceptable scores. It'll be applied to anyone who plays that course that day. So one thing to keep in mind here, as I mentioned, this is one of the big reasons, one of the important reasons why you should post on the day you play, because your score will be factored into whether or not the PCC is applied. But if you do not post your score on that day, it will not factor into whether or not it was applied. But if there was a PCC applied that day and you post 3 days later, that PCC will still be applied to your score. It will just not change the calculation of the PCC. So that's why if you don't post on that day, it can't be factored in, but it still will affect your score potentially, and it will also affect the accuracy of the PCC, because it does look at everyone that played from any set of tees that day that is 36.0 or below. Again, that it's meant to be conservative in nature. It's probably not something that is going to be seen a lot, but it will also help us at the State Golf Association level evaluate our course ratings. If there is a PCC that's being applied regularly on days when the course setup is atypical and the weather is mild as well, and we see that PCC continuing to be applied, well, then maybe we can take a look at the course rating and see what's going on there. So obviously here in Washington, we don't know quite yet how often you'll see it. Like I said, it's probably not going to be much, but come March 1, it will start to be factored in with the posting scores each day, and when it does happen, you'll be able to see on your scoring record, when you take a look, there'll be a column for whether or not a PCC was applied. There'll be a little icon by the score you can click on and see, what the PCC was that day. And again, as I said, at the club level, there is a report that you'll be able to run where you can see if your golf course had a PCC applied on that day, and you'll be able to see who played that day and who was affected by the playing condition calculation. This is the memory of a low handicap index. So once a player has at least 20 acceptable scores in their scoring record, the memory of a low handicap index will be retained. This is on a 365 day, so 1 year period. Call it kind of a rolling cycle because it precedes the most recent score in the player scoring record. So that's just to say, today being January 29th, if I posted today and I just hit my 20th score, my index would be, say it's just for simplicity, a 10.0. That is now my low handicap index, and as long as I don't go below that 10.0 score, that low index is going to remain for up to 1 year from the date that my most recent score was posted. So if I go all the way around, my low handicap index is still 10.0, and I post a score on January 15th, 2021, my low handicap index is not going to then suddenly be recalculated on January 29th, 2021, unless I post a score. So that's what I mean by a rolling 365-day period. You can cross over that 365-day period if you aren't posting any scores, but as soon as you post a score after that 365-day period, a new low handicap index will be calculated. So the reason for this is to limit the increase on the upward movement of a handicap index. Oops, sorry, I gotta go back here, went the wrong way here. So this low index will always be displayed in a player's scoring record. You'll be able to see on GIN when you go look. If you have the GIN app now and you're looking at your own score on the home screen, it'll display your current handicap index, and right below it, it'll say low handicap index right there, and it will tell you what your low handicap index is at all times. If a committee applied an adjustment that causes a player's handicap index to increase, the low handicap index should be set at that level. That'll prevent the player from receiving a softer hard cap, which we're going to get into here in just a minute. Again, this won't come into effect until a player has a full scoring record of 20 scores. But the low handicap index here is the basis or the fundamental aspect of one of the new safeguards in the World Handicapping System, which is the limit on an upward movement, or what's also going to be known as the soft cap and hard cap. So take a look at that. There's no limit to the amount by which a player's handicap can decrease. As you lower your handicap index, that you will change your low handicap index, but once you start moving the other direction, start moving upwards on your handicap index, there's two different trigger points that are going to limit the extreme upward movement. The first is a soft cap, the second is a hard cap. So a player's handicap index should never increase by more than 5 strokes above your low handicap index over that rolling 12-month period. And these soft and hard caps are going to ensure that that does not take place. So we're going to look at the soft cap first. again, we'll go through some examples here, and we will have some time for questions because this is a brand new procedure, and really no equivalent to this has been in place prior to now in the USG handicap system. So they're implemented soft cap and hard cap to ensure the temporary loss of form does not cause a player's handicap index to move too far from a level that's consistent with their demonstrated ability. It also serves as an anti-abuse safeguard and will aid in minimizing the potential for a player to manipulate their handicap. Handicap committee at your club will always still play a key role and have the ability to allow a player's index to exceed the hard cap if there are special circumstances that apply, say in the case of an injury. So you do have the ability on the committee level to override these cap procedures, but they are automatic functions of the system, and the soft cap and the hard cap will both kick in automatically without you at the committee level having to do anything for those. So it favors a consistent player, and the volatility. The players who are a little more volatile will be impacted more, which is going to prevent somebody from jumping their handicap up a couple strokes right prior to a competition, and trying to just limit some of that manipulation that players had figured out under the old system. So let's take a look at the soft cap first. That's going to suppress the upward movement by 50% as soon as a player reaches 3.0 strokes or more above their low handicap index. So we'll see an example here on the next slide. So the low index of this player is 10.0. He just posted a new score and it jumped his current 8 of 20 average up to 15.2. So like I said on the previous slide, once he hits that 3.0 above his low handicap index of 10, that's when the soft cap is going to kick in. So with this revision, he jumped up to a 15.2. So here's the process. First, you're going to subtract the low handicap index from his current 8 of 20 average. That's going to be 5.2. Next, you're going to determine how much greater than 3.0 the result is. So in this case, you're taking 5.2 minus 3.0 to get to a total of 2.2. Next, subtract 50% of that resulting value from the 8 of 20 average. So that 15.2 minus 50% of 2.2 equals out to a 14.1. So with that soft cap in place, this player, instead of the 15.2, his handicap index is just going to be a 14.1 because he's had that soft cap applied. So as soon as, in this example, 15.2 was his new calculated average, but as soon as that hit in this situation, say it was a 13.1 or 13.2, this same procedure would kick in, would go into place, and he would be based off any handicap index that is above 3.0 strokes above his low index. And this will be continued as that player's 8 of 20 average changes. The soft cap is recalculated with each revision. So if he posts scores and he continues to rise above that 15.2 with each revision, the soft cap will be recalculated using this same formula until he reaches a point of the hard cap, which is where we'll get next. And this, like I said before, this is an automatic calculation from the system, so you will not need to go in there and apply this. It is built into the software, and it is automatically recalculated with each revision just based on the player's index and their low handicap index. So once the soft cap kicks in, there's a couple ways a player can play their way out of it. That would be either with posting scores that brings their handicap index down below that 3.0 level above their 10.0 index, or if their low handicap index rises. As we spoke about just a couple minutes ago, that low handicap index is on a 365-day rolling period. So if he's nearing that mark, and in this situation he's at 15.2, and he passes that 365-day mark, and say his low handicap index then jumps up to a 12.5, the soft cap again is going to automatically be taken away. So with each revision, like I said, it looks at the player's low handicap index and their current 8 of 20 average, and looks to see if the soft cap needs to be applied, and if so, it does that. So as you keep going up, you eventually reach a hard cap. The hard cap, once that player gets more than 5 strokes or more above their low handicap index, the hard cap kicks in and it caps it at that 5.0 above limit. And it's important to remember that that hard cap limit is the 5.0 hard cap limit is the number after the soft cap has been applied. So as we saw in that last example for the soft cap, the player was already 5.0, he was 5.2 strokes above his low handicap index, but with the soft cap being applied, it moved him down to a 14.1. So that hard cap, it will not kick in until that player's handicap index is 5.0 or above after the soft cap is applied. So let's take a look at an example here. Player again has a low handicap index of 10.0. His current average of 8 of 20 is now 17.4. Again, we go through the same process. We subtract the low handicap index from his 8 of 20 average, get 7.4. We determine how much greater that is than the 3.0 minimum for the soft cap. That becomes 4.4. We subtract 50% of that resulting value from his 8 of 20 average. In this case, that becomes 2.2. So you take 2.2 from his 17.4 8 of 20 average, and that becomes a 15.2. That is 5.2 strokes above his low handicap index. So the hard cap kicks in, and that moves him down to a 15.0. So again, once you hit that 15.0 or above, the hard cap just kicks in. And again, the same rules apply here when it comes to hard cap as far as how a player plays their way out of it. They either would need to post scores to bring that 8 of 20 average down below that 15.0 threshold when the hard cap is applied, or when the cap procedures are applied, I should say. And once he does that, the soft cap will kick back in, or if his handicap index raises, his low handicap index raises, excuse me, to a point where the hard cap no longer needs to be applied. Those would be, again, the way he plays out of that. And again, both hard cap and soft cap procedures are calculated or looked at to see if they need to be applied with each revision, and if they do, they will be applied automatically. So as a player, you'll be able to see in your record if you've had this apply. It'll be noted with an asterisk that you can select to view exactly why, to view this calculation, what numbers were used and why the hard and soft cap was applied. At your club, if you have this being applied and you have questions from your members, this is where you can point. You'll be able to point them to the exact calculated data that got them here. And in situations where it needs to be removed for whatever reason, if there is, an injury, something along those lines, that takes place, you will have the ability to override these caps. So as I mentioned, tournament scores are no longer considered when it comes to an exceptional score. This can come from any round posted, whether it's competitive or not. Competitive scores can still be designated when you post, but that is more for your own reference or for the committee's reference when they review a player's handicap index to see, just to differentiate what their scores were during competition. Or if you want to track your own, just to see how your scores differ when you compete versus when you just play a casual round of golf. But with that said, now anytime you post a score, if it is a score differential of 7.0 or below, the exceptional score reduction will automatically kick in. How this works, if a score 7.0 to 9.9 below your handicap index is posted, it will automatically look at your previous 20 scores, well, that score plus your previous 19, I guess it would be more accurate to say, and it will reduce all of those score differentials by 1. The same process is applied if it is 10.0 strokes or lower below your handicap index. Then it will reduce those scores in your scoring record by 2.0 strokes. And then your handicap will be recalculated based on those new differentials in your record. So as a player moves forward, they will play their way out of this reduction as they post more scores, because once the exceptional score reduction is applied, it's only to that score that you posted and going backwards to hit your 20 most recent. As you continue to post, it's not applied to scores going forward, unless of course those scores happen to be 7.0 strokes or lower below your handicap index. So let's take a look at an example here to show you how a player scoring record is affected. So taking a look here, first the player posted a score on 5/22. This score was a 4.1. This player here is an 11.0, or excuse me, 11.5 index. So that score more than 7 below his scoring record. Excuse me, sorry, more than 7 below his handicap index. So starting from the posting of that score and going retroactive to his 20 most recent, all those score differentials are reduced by 1, and his handicap index is recalculated based on those scores. So going forward again in his record, this player on 9/5, again, same situation applied. The score is 7.0 or more below his handicap index. So all of these scores are again reduced by 1, and you can see this overlap period here from when going backwards, the previous 20 were reduced by 1 for this score posted on 9/5, and also for this score posted on 5/22. So then as he goes forward, these next scores posted on 9/22, 9/29 do not have that ESR adjustment, which was the same procedure that happened from 5/22 going forward until 9/5, until he posted an additional score that triggered that reduction. So you can have multiple reductions applied, and the difference here is from 7 strokes to 10 strokes. If these scores that were posted that triggered the reduction were 10.0 strokes or lower from his index, all these negative ones would be -2s. And then as they go forward, they're no longer calculated in. So you can see here, this player, when he was first reduced, he started to play his way out of it until he posted another score that triggered that additional reduction. So if a player is posting multiple scores that are below the 7.0, they're going to get reduced very quickly. And the only way out of it is to continue playing scores that do not have that reduction. So you can see here that it does add up quickly if you have multiple. So it is pretty punitive if player is posting a lot of scores. Their handicap index is going to go down very quickly. But as they continue to post scores, they will get out of it there. So this is another procedure that if there is a justifiable reason at your club that if the player is being reduced and they bring it to the committee for some reason, you feel this score was truly an anomaly, and the player's handicap index was still an accurate reflection before the score, and the adjustment doesn't need to be applied. There may be certain circumstances where the committee could override that adjustment. I would say 7.0 on the score differential below your handicap index is very rare. So I think in the majority of cases, this ESR adjustment will be warranted, but certainly it's something that at the committee level you can review the player scoring record and talk to them about it if this is applied and they feel that it is not properly applied. Again, just like in the hard and soft cap, if you as a player or if one of your members has this ESR adjustment, you'll be able to see that it's being applied in their scoring record. It'll show up in a column, looks very similar to this on the screen, and that you'll see which scores are being affected by the ESR adjustment and how far going back those are in their record. So I see a couple questions here. Wendy, if it seems this reduction scenario might encourage players not to post low scores, players posting their accurate score is the fundamental aspect of the handicap system. So they should always be posting their scores accurately. If they're posting higher scores to try and raise their handicap index, that hard and soft cap that we just discussed previously will limit that. So certainly the ESR adjustment is something that will show up after a player is post. So it's not, I would say it's not front and center, but it's part of the handicap committee's responsibility to review players' records and to ensure that they are posting their scores accurately. So that if you as a committee or at your club, it's brought to your attention that somebody is not intentionally posting scores for this reason, then you would need to speak with them and do a review of their handicap. So next couple slides here, we'll kind of go over quickly because this is not new information. Just want to reiterate with World Handicap System that the USGA course rating system is still in place. It was the reason why we were able to maintain player scoring records and just recalculate a handicap index on January 6th when the new World Handicap Engine software launched. The course rating system is the fundamental aspect of the handicap system. All scores are based on the ratings that we give courses in the course rating system. So the two work hand in hand. And as I mentioned earlier, this system is being implemented in all other areas of the world. We were just fortunate here that all of our information is already in place at the start of WHS. So real quickly, what is a course rating? It's the evaluation of playing difficulty of a course for a scratch player under normal course conditions. So that course rating you see when you look at the scorecard or when you look online, that is essentially the expected score for a scratch player from that set of tees on a normal day under normal conditions. So it's to the 10th. And you can find that information always on the course scorecard or on the WA Golf website or on GIN. So the bogey rating here is another aspect of course rating that is equally important, but it is kind of the hidden rating. You won't find this published, but it is used to calculate the slope rating, which you do find published. So the bogey rating works just like the course rating does, but it is the evaluation of the bogey golfer, which is an approximately a 20.0 handicap for men and a 24.0 for women, expressed the same way, and it is, again, essentially the expected score that the bogey player would shoot from that set of tees that you're playing. So the bogey rating, slope rating, or excuse me, bogey rating, course rating, the difference between those is multiplied by the difference factor to produce a slope rating. And so slope rating for every set of tees that you see, it then allows course handicaps to be calculated and players to then take their handicap index and translate that to a net competition from any given set of tees. So this, again, measures a relative difficulty between the scratch player and the bogey player. So with that background, that kind of leads up to course handicap. And this, I'm sure most people at this point have already seen the change here. It is probably the most significant change moving from the USGA handicap system to the World Handicap System. And it's the change that I think has the most, I'd say, shock value to players. But once you start to look at it, you can realize it's not just a loss of strokes per se. The target of a course handicap and what it calculates has changed, and for a couple important reasons we'll get into. So under the USGA handicap system, course handicap represented the number of strokes needed to play to the course rating for the tees that were being played. So now the benchmark in course handicap is par. It's much more intuitive for most people, and quite frankly, it's what many players assumed or thought incorrectly under the USGA handicap system. You'd take your figure out your course handicap, and you'd look at it and say that's what you needed to shoot to play to your handicap that day. And it wasn't the case. That's what you needed to shoot to play to the course rating for the tees you were playing. So now by applying a course rating minus par adjustment, it will reflect the number of strokes a player needs to play to the par of that set of tees that they are playing. So you can see here in blue on the right hand side of the course handicap, that is the course rating minus par adjustment. So the left hand side of the course handicap calculation is the same as it was prior, but we've added that course rating minus par adjustment. So along with changing the target of what a course handicap represents, it also eliminates the need for the section 3-5 adjustment in the USGA handicap system for players playing from multiple tees in an event. So this simplifies the process. It's straightforward. If two players are competing from a different set of tees, they can calculate their course handicap with no adjustments as long as par is the same between those sets of tees. So there's no need to make that 3-5 adjustment, which most often was either misapplied or not applied entirely under the old system. So in the majority of circumstances, you're just going to be able to calculate your course handicaps, and you can play an equitable match or an equitable competition from two different sets of tees, just based on course handicap. So those are really the two significant changes, or the two significant reasons for the change in the calculation of a course handicap. And it's also important to remember, I know we've gotten lots of questions and there's a lot of concern out there about this, but it's the change in calculation for everybody. It's the change in target for everyone. So if you take a look and you play a set of tees regularly that has a course rating of 70 and your par is set at 72 at your golf course, your course handicap is going to lose 2 strokes, but that is applied to everyone. And when you compete, the target score for a net competition is going to change. So a good net score that day, or on any given day now, is probably going to be a couple strokes under par net. So that's, I think, the important thing really to remember here is that players that have a good day, that play below their handicap that day, you're probably not going to see them shoot some of the really low net scores that you would see before, down in the low 60s range. If a player outplays their handicap by a few strokes that day, then they're going to be just a couple strokes under par, where depending upon the tees you played before, a player that outplayed their handicap just by a couple strokes, if they were playing from a more forward set of tees, they may end up with a very low net score. That's really the change in target and what course handicap is measuring, and now that benchmark is par. So we'll take a look at a couple examples here as a change. You can see here, here's an example on the old system where course handicap or a handicap index of 0.0 on the left, and a handicap index of 15.0 on the right. Here is their course handicaps. Obviously, if you're 0.0 under the old system, when you calculate it, you're going to come out to a 0 at all times. Old system, here's a 15. His handicap range on these sets of tees went from an 18 to a 15. So now we go forward to course handicap under WHS. First, we'll take a look at the 0.0. Now with that course rating minus par adjustment, where he was a 0 before, now he's a 2 handicap from that back set of tees. You can see the rating of 74.2 as a 0 handicap. His gross score, his gross expected score is 74. Round that down, say he should be shooting a 74. So those 2 strokes are reflected in his net strokes that he receives. So if he shoots that 74, which is gross score, that's the expectation for his gross score, his net score is par. Same thing as you move down to the blue tees. His expected score there, 72.8. Round that to 73. You do the course handicap calculation. He comes and he gets 1 stroke. If he hits his expected score gross based on the course rating, his net score is going to be par of 72. As you go down through the table, and course ratings change, they lower as you go forward. Obviously playing from 6,000 yards, that rating now is dropped down to 69.9. So that's that 0.0's expected score on an average day under normal conditions. He should shoot 69.9. So he needs +2 to equal his net par, which if he again hits that mark of 69.9 or 70, since you can't have 9/10 of a stroke in his gross score, his net score again is going to be 72. So you can, again, as you go down, you can see the difference when par changes to 69. If this golf course had at 4,900 yards here, in this circumstance, or this example here, par has changed to 69 from that most forward set of tees. If they kept their par at 72 throughout the entire golf course, this player would again get 3 more strokes on their course handicap, so he'd jump up to an 8 in that circumstance. So that you can see how par changes a little bit there, and how it is important to have an accurate par set at the course. So let's take a look at the 15.0. This again, it will produce the higher the handicap, probably the higher the spread's going to be, and the greater the difference in your course ratings, obviously then the greater that the course handicap spread at your course is going to be when you go from the furthest back set of tees to the most forward set of tees. But that, again, that course rating is a reflection of what a player should be shooting, expected to shoot from those sets of tees. And when you think about the difference in a player playing from 7,000 yards to playing to just under 5,000 yards, it's not uncommon that they would shoot 10 strokes better in their score. So again, let's just take a look here quick. Same principles applied as we had in the previous play example of the 0.0. This player's 15.0 index from the back tee gives him a course handicap of 20. So if he hits his expected score for the day, he's going to reach his net par of 72. You think about that just kind of logically, a 15 handicap, 20 strokes, probably shooting right around 92 pretty regularly. So again, their course handicap is going to hit right around net par. So that's the course handicap adjustment. Again, it's a big change. We understand that, but it is much more intuitive to players. It does produce more equitable net competitions, and it does so with most often not having to make a significant adjustment when you move from tee set to tee set, because in most circumstances, the par for your tees are going to be the same throughout the entire course. So with those examples, take a look here at some course handicap tables. We have sent an email out to everyone asking that any course handicap tables at your club from previous years should be discarded. They are no longer accurate. We have new course handicap tables coming. They're being produced by the USGA for us, so time frame we've been given is kind of mid to late March when we'll have those available, and then be able to get them out to your club. Here's an example of what they're going to look like. You can use the posties, where your course handicap tables are now. If they're by your score posting computer, if you hang them near the first tee, we will have those replacements. It's just they're not quite ready yet. In the meantime, you can run a handicap report from the admin portal. I know there were some issues the first week when that software was released, but we've been assured by Jen that all those issues have been taken care of. And if you run a course handicap report at your club for your roster, it will be accurate. And also, if you go online to gin.com or you go on the Gin app, you can use the course handicap calculator there as well to get an accurate course handicap until these new tables are distributed to clubs. Additionally, I will add that the USGA TM or Golf Genius software, this update has been made as well. So course handicaps are being calculated correctly based on the new formula under WHS. So one more slide real quick, and then we'll take some questions on course handicap. The new concept of playing handicap has been introduced. This is just simply your course handicap times any handicap allowances. We'll talk about handicap allowances and the changes there in detail just a little bit later. But it's based on your format of play or based on the conditions set forth by your competition committee, and that for your format of play. So it really, this existed prior, but there was not a name for it, and the process has changed just a little bit slightly. So say you're playing a 4-ball competition. The new recommendation for 4-ball is 85% of a player's course handicap. So this player here, he's a 15.0 course handicap. He gets that multiplied by 0.85, and that brings him down to a 13. So the important thing to remember here too is that when you calculate your playing handicap, rounding does not occur until the final or until the calculation is complete, I should say. So prior to this year, you would take your course handicap, and if you wanted to give a certain percentage of it for your 4-ball competition, you would calculate the full course handicap, round it, and then multiply it by the percentage. Going forward, you do not, you calculate your course handicap, but you don't round it until you've multiplied that number by the handicap allowance, and then you round at the end. So it's a minor change, but it is an important one, because it will, if you round prior to applying that handicap allowance, you may not come up with the same number that you would if you waited to the end to round. And again, if you're using the Golf Genius or USGA TM software to run your club events, this is built into the software, and it will round properly for you when calculating the handicap allowance. All right, well, Collin, we'll let you jump right in. Our next slide is the handicap review.
All right, thank you very much. So the handicap review, what we're just trying to go over here is some of the general information as a handicap chair and handicap committee, some of the things that are your guys' responsibility and that we asked you to take care of. The review isn't a new thing, but the USGA is making it a little more clear on what they're expecting. What this is they want it done at least once a year, most likely either the beginning of the year or the end of the year or both. And what it is going through your players' handicap indexes, looking them over, making sure that people are compliant. And here are some of the things that the USGA set out to analyze or look through. Basically, looking through their scores, seeing if they are posting their scores, if they're posting in a timely manner, and how those scores are, their frequency of the last 12 months versus the previous 12 months, kind of looking at their trend and how their handicap has been moving. And so as you can see here, it kind of covers many things, but it's just taking a look through, and you don't have to go in depth on every player, but it's kind of focusing on the people that have had handicap indexes adjust a lot over the year, and then looking at them specifically, and especially if you have any that have hit the caps or if you have any that have the ESRs applied. Okay. So here, adjusting handicap indexes, this is something that you guys as the handicap committee have the ability to do. When you do a handicap review and you find anybody that needs to be adjusted due to injury or that the system isn't adjusting for appropriately, or if you find that their handicap should be going up further than the 5 strokes that it's allowed, these are things that you as a committee can adjust for. couple other criteria they show there is that it must be a minimum of 1 full stroke. They don't want half strokes or 0.2. They want adjustments of 1 to 2 strokes, somewhere in there. Of course, there are circumstances where people need to be lowered more or raised more. You have the prerogative to do that, but it is something that we would ask that you talk over with us first before you make any major adjustments to people's handicaps. We are certainly here for you to help. While it is up to you guys for these adjustments, we just like to be involved so that we can help support you and make sure that you understand what's going on and if there's any changes that need to be done. Here are some of the reasons that adjustments can be made. Player scoring potential, any handicaps previously held by the player. So if they had a handicap with a club that wasn't affiliated with GIN, and let's say those scores didn't transfer over or there was some sort of issue, that might be a reason to make an adjustment. Whether the player is an improver or a steady player or declining player, how they're playing and how if the system is reacting fast enough. Because even still, with using the 8 lowest scores, there are times where the system may not react fast enough to the improvement of the player or the player going up. So those are times where you guys can step in and help out. Injury is definitely a major one because there's always those times where stuff happens in life and we need to help people out. Permanent injury is a big one. One of the things that I want to make sure you guys know is you do have the ability to create a new GIN number for someone if it's warranted for major injury where their game has had to completely change. It may not be enough to just modify their handicap, but you may need to create an entire new GIN record for them if it's a serious enough thing. When you do adjust a player's handicap index, you do set a time frame for that adjustment to end. When you go to the modifying area, it'll ask you what you want to modify it to, and then how long you want that modification to last. Usually with a modification, I would recommend having it set about 2 weeks to a month, and that way you can check it after that and see how the handicap index is adjusting and if the modification is still warranted. The adjustment upward or downward movement must have the effect of freezing or modifying the handicap index for a defined period of time, or resetting the index by applying an adjustment to each of the most recent 20 scores. There are 2 different ways that you can make adjustments, either adjusting individual scores or by doing the modifying and actually setting an amount. Penalty scores are kind of your first line that you're able to first line of offense that you can do. This is where we would recommend you usually start before you actually modify if there's an issue with a player. Penalty scores can be applied for numerous reasons. If the reason was valid and an acceptable score is still discoverable, a score can be posted. What it's talking about here is if the player is not posting or is failing to submit a post, there are valid reasons where they might not be able to, and that's why it's very important to talk with your players before you apply penalty scores. We've had instances where people just start applying them and your members have no reason why they're getting them, and that causes more animosity than than actually talking with them, and so they understand what's happening. If you do decide to post a penalty score because they do not have a valid reason, the one thing you should do is always try to find the original score to post it also. So let's say they had a low score of 74, they chose not to post, and you found out, you can post not only that low score 74, but an additional penalty score to kind of double the impact. The penalty scores we usually recommend them to be equivalent to the lowest handicap differential or the lowest score differential in their past 20 scores. So if they had an exceptional score of 72 and that was the lowest one with the lowest differential in the past 20, you would post another one equivalent to that. In most serious cases, such as repeated failure to submit acceptable scores, the committee has the discretion to apply additional penalty scores or reset the player's handicap index or consider other disciplinary procedures. This is where, if you get past that case of the penalty score isn't working, then this is where we would really like you guys to contact us so that we can help you out and help determine what is a good option. In the most extreme cases, you guys have the ability to withdraw a player's handicap. What this means is that their handicap index would change to a WD and not be applicable until you remove that. This is actually has to be approved by us. What would happen is you would send in a formal letter letting us know what the offense was, what you've done to try to correct it, and then what your plan is for the future. This is very rare. In my past 4 or 5 years, I've only seen it once, and again, it was a serious issue, and how the club went about it they had a good solution, and what they actually did is while they withdrew his handicap for 6 months, in that time frame, he was required to send all scores to the handicap chair, so that way he can prove that he is posting his scores and that he is doing it correctly. When you withdraw a person's handicap, they still can post scores and you will be able to see that they're posting them, but it won't actually affect their handicap because it's set as WD. When you have a withdrawal, um, like I said, you do have to come to us, and then we're the ones who actually set it. And then when you feel that the time has come to reinstate it, you would contact us, and we would reinstate that handicap for you after a set period of time. When you're considering whether or not to reinstate their handicap index, I think this is where working with the player is so important, and knowing and seeing that they are trying to conform to the rules and they are demonstrating the ability to actually follow the handicap guidelines and that they're following the rules of golf. It's strongly recommended that under this option, the handicap committee monitors the player's handicap index. Like I said, they can still post scores and you can monitor what their index is, but it won't actually show up on their record.
Competition committee is next. We touched on this just a little bit. This is Rule 7.2. It's dealing with what the competition committee is allowed to do and why they have some of the recommendations that they do. So the committee is always in charge of setting the terms of the competition. They can set the maximum limit or minimum limit for handicaps for play. They can set a maximum for course handicap, a maximum for playing handicap, and regardless of, if so, your committee, for example, could say our maximum course handicap for this competition is 36. So any player whose calculated course handicap would be above 36 would just be reduced down to 36 for that competition. That's something that the committee's discretion. They're allowed to set those terms. The important thing is that you set your terms of competition and you publish them prior to the competition, so it's clear to all of your competitors. Same thing goes for the playing handicap and maximum handicap index for entry, or for that a player is permitted to use during a competition. It's just an example here. Again, kind of talked about what the maximum course handicap would be, or what the index would be for entry into a competition, and then from there, when you set up your competition, you just need to make sure you abide by modifying course handicaps properly. So a competition committee does not have the authority to modify a player's handicap index, but they do have the authority to modify a player's course handicap based on the terms of their competition. So that's an important distinction there between those two. They have control over course handicap, but they cannot modify a handicap index. They can set a restriction on what handicap indexes are allowed to play in their event, but do not have the ability to modify a handicap index. That's more of the same there. Multi-round competition here. This, I mentioned it briefly earlier, but if you are running multi-round competitions at your club, say you got a weekend 2-day competition, club championship, that kind of thing, or you need some time to prepare your competition, to prepare scorecards, those kind of things, say flight your competition, it's important that you state which day you are going to calculate handicap indexes from. So you want to be at the start of the competition, and again, that's up to you. If you have a Saturday competition and you want to take Friday to prepare all of your materials, whether it's scorecards, those kind of things, you have the right to say we're going to take handicap indexes as of the revision on Thursday prior to the competition. Or if you need more time than that, you can certainly do more. If you have, say your entries close on a Sunday night and you have a competition that next Saturday, you have the right within your competition committee to say we're going to take handicap indexes as of the Monday prior. That is, again, that's up to the committee. It's just important that you state that so it's known for players ahead of time. And when you come to a 2-day competition, you want to take, if you, whatever day you say you're going to take those handicap indexes from, those apply to the entire competition. You should not be updating handicap indexes after the first day of a 2-day competition and then recalculating them for round 2. Whatever the handicap index players have to start with, that should be used throughout the entire competition. Now this may change for some competitions when you have say multi-week competitions. Then again, it's if you have a match play competition that goes over the course of the summer, it's just important that you stipulate for each round when your handicap index is going to be calculated. It's up to you to do that and just make those clear. Certainly, if you have that kind of competition that goes over the course of a long period like that, multiple weeks, multiple months, it's reasonable to have your handicap indexes recalculated throughout that, because players' form and ability may change over that time and you want it to be accurately reflected with each round. But it's just important that you set the date so all of your competitors know what handicap indexes to use and on which date. So you'll be able to go back in your scoring record, or if, depending upon what software you use, if you use the Golf Genius software, you can update handicap indexes and you can set a specific date to calculate them from. Or as a player, you will be able to look up your previous handicap indexes on a certain date. So that is how, with the daily revisions, you would use a particular date set. But again, just the most important thing is that the committee is clear when it comes to setting these terms of the competition. So handicap allowances, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but there are some changes in the recommended allowances when it comes to handicap, course handicap, playing handicap for your competitions. Again, these are recommendations. It is up to the committee ultimately to decide what they want to use. But if you see the table on the right there, there's a couple significant changes from the most common forms of play. So the new recommendation for any individual stroke play or Stableford event is 95%. Previously, it was just 100%. Now the recommendation is that a player gets 95% of their course handicap for their playing handicap for that competition. 4-ball stroke play recommendation moved from 95% for women and 90% to men to 85% for everyone. That is also an important note to make here, that these recommendations are no longer gender specific. They apply to both men and women. And so these tables here are for both. You can find this in your book in Appendix C. These are outlined, so that would be page 91 in your book. You'll find both these tables, so you can always reference those. Some haven't changed as you look through there. The foursome still 50% combined. Scramble, the recommendation is also the same there, with 35 from the low and 15% from the high. Yes, and Rich, your question, allowances are applied to the index before the course handicap is calculated. They are applied to the course handicap before the course handicap is rounded to a whole number. So you don't apply it to the index. You calculate the course handicap. You just don't do that final step of rounding in the course handicap. You apply the allowance first, and then you round. That is an important distinction, because it will change your ultimate playing handicap number. And again, just reiterate, these are recommendations. Your committee can decide to do really whatever they would like when it comes to setting handicap allowances. Stroke index allocation here, I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but want to provide an example here. You can see and kind of talk through it a little bit. So prior to the World Handicap System release, there were 2 different recommended methods for determining the stroke allocation for a golf course. They both required you to collect hundreds of scorecards and then process that data in different ways. One required the full range of handicaps, 0 through 36, and others allowed you to separate, or required you to separate 2 distinct groups from low and high handicaps. And that is, the recommendation for that is gone. Again, it is a recommendation, so if that's the method you would still like to use, or if your committee would like to use any other recommended method, that is ultimately your decision. But there's a couple reasons that make sense to look at the new recommendation and to potentially base your stroke index allocation off that, or something close to it. Most importantly is the subjectivity is taken out. So course rating data is unbiased. It provides a recommendation that is strictly based off of what the data says, and is based on the difficulty of the hole as determined by course rating. So each set of tees will produce an independent rankings, but it's recommended that you kind of look at the most common played set of tees for each gender. Many golf courses now have 2 separate allocations. You can get by either way, whether you have one for men, one for women, or one for the entire course. Really, the tees and the data, when you look at between men and women for the same tee set, it does vary quite differently, or quite a bit, because basically it amounts to the distance that players hit it, factor into, between men and women, make obstacles factor in differently in course rating. So I would strongly encourage everyone to look at a separate recommendation for men and women, but it is not necessary. You can still have one for the entire golf course, and you can certainly take data from different sets of tees to come up with one that it makes sense for the whole golf course. If you have a big variation between a most commonly played set of tees and a forward set or a back set on certain holes that get played frequently as well. So it's not a perfect system. It requires you to kind of look at the data and see what you think is best for your golf course. But with that recommendation that is given based on hole data, it then splits up, as you can see in the example here, triads and evenly distributes those strokes. So I think it's easiest to think about a difference of 6 on a handicap match. So if you're giving or getting 6 strokes, you take a look at your current course's allocation, there's a good chance that that player may be getting those 6 strokes on consecutive holes or in a short cluster, and there could be a big gap between when they get another one. So if you follow the recommended method of best placing your holes within this triad system, which splits up every three holes as a new triad, you can see it spreads it out. So if you're giving 6 strokes in a match, the player will get one on the 3rd hole here, the 6th hole, the 9th hole, 11th, 14th, 16th, again in this example. So it spreads it out to make match play more equitable, but it's kind of the best combination of where a player is most likely to make double bogey or worse, and how can we most fairly distribute that to promote equitable match play competitions. So that's the basis for the new stroke index allocation. And this kind of goes a little more detail on what I just talked through. You can find this in Appendix E. What you can't find there is the course rating data that needs to come from the Allied Golf Association. So I will say that the process of getting all of your scorecards into the course rating system has been very time consuming. We've reached out to every golf course and asked that they submit a scorecard, and it's not until we get your current allocation that we can actually produce a report for you. So we are working through it in the order that they've been received as far as sending reports back. It's not recommended or not required, excuse me, that your course changes to this new recommendation now. I think the most likely scenario in the courses I've worked with so far, they are considering the change when they either get their course re-rated when they come through on that cycle that we do of approximately every 7 years, or when it comes time to order new scorecards. Scorecards are obviously the biggest thing. You've got an expense there at the club of having those scorecards, and with the importance of net double bogey that's played now, that stroke index needs to match for anybody that comes and plays a course. That information needs to be accurate so they can calculate their net double bogey properly as they play. So if you're interested in this index allocation report, we do plan on getting them out to every club as we move throughout the spring here. If you are considering making a change now, please do reach out to me and I can get you a report quickly so you can look into it and consider it as you look at making changes to your index allocation. So the next page here is just an example of what that report looks like. You can see the numbers there on the left. On the difficulty value column are the expected strokes over par for, in this case, a male player. And then it ranks those 1 through 18 based on difficulty value. Then, excuse me, puts front odd holes on the front 9, even holes on the back, based on that ranking of difficulty value. And then the next column, stroke index, looks at how they can best be distributed throughout the course. And then that, excuse me, the final column is just the course's current stroke allocation. So you can see in this example here, there are some big discrepancies in certain holes, but also a lot are not that far off here. Specifically, you look at the 13th hole in this example, that one's probably right on, other than the fact that it's odds and evens. So when you look at this compared to what's already at your golf course, you'll see that the data that you've already collected and you've spent time, pouring over to get your proper allocation under the previous system is not invalid data, and oftentimes it is very close, but it doesn't necessarily match up with the recommendation for the triad system. So it's all things to consider, but the recommendation has changed going forward, and ultimately it will save you a lot of time at the course and a lot of effort in collecting 200 to 400 scorecards, inputting that data somewhere and having to pour over it. Something we can just provide to you going forward. So kind of going hand in hand with that is adjudicating hole par. So new with World Handicap System is a recommendation for what par should be. Again, this is a recommendation. I want to just make sure that's clear that these numbers that you see on the screen here in this table are your golf course is not going to be changed based on these numbers. There is no need that you have to go change par. Certainly part of what the par recommendations take into place or take into account is the way the hole was designed. So if you have a par 5 hole that the back tees, it was designed to be a par 5. The back tees are well within this range of 450 and above. But as you move forward, your sets of tees may get into that 400, 410, 15 area. And you have, say, a men's rating for that set of tees, but they still aren't commonly played, or the hole was designed as a par 5. Leaving those sets of tees as a par 5 is perfectly reasonable and not something that needs to be changed, or that we here at WA Golf are going to come in and tell you that you have to change. That's not how we want to approach this. We want to just make sure you're educated on it. We talked through the course handicap calculation. Everybody can see how that changes between your par and how many strokes you're going to get when your par changes on a set of tees. So I'll go back here to sets up, but a lot of, every golf course has a set of tees or a tee on a certain hole that does not fall within these ranges, and that's going to be common. But as you kind of look through your golf course, if you consider making changes on things, are the guidelines that you'll want to look at as you go through. So again, this kind of more what I said there. You'll have a lot of holes that fall on a break point, and you want to consider the design of the golf course and how the hole was built, what the intention was. Certainly things. If you have a hole that plays at 440 yards, but it's significantly uphill, it plays as a par 5 for you, and players really can't reach it into. You got to look at more than just the yardage. Same thing works as you move forward, and you have tees at a shorter yardage that, based just on the recommendation of the table, say maybe it should be a par 3, but there's designs, there's a pond in front of the hole, or other obstacles that prevent the player from getting to that hole in one shot. It really makes it a true par 4. Then those are things you'll want to consider as well. and also who's playing that set of tees. Where we find the most holes that don't fall into the prescribed ranges are sets of tees, forward sets of tees that are most commonly played by women, but the men's rating is still present. Then you look at the design, you look at who's playing, and you don't need to go in and set a different par for every set of tees. So it's something as you look at and as we go forward, we just want to work with golf courses on. We want to provide you information, and we want to just be in communication about these things to answer questions. But you see on the slide, it does say the Allied Golf Association will have final say if there's a dispute. That's not what we are looking for. That's within the rules, but that's not what the approach that we want to take is, and not what we're aiming to do. So moving on, temporary ratings for an unrated set of tees. This is a change from the previous USGA handicap system. I think it's a very welcome change, something that makes a lot more sense. So you know, any golf course, tees get moved forward and backwards on a tee set for maintenance reasons, for all kinds of reasons. Maybe a particular hole, if you, especially a par 3, moves forward or backwards on a set of tees, and it changes the overall length of that set of tees. The old system, once you hit, I think it was about 17 yards for men and 14 yards for women, somewhere around there, that's when there was an adjustment to the course rating that was supposed to be made. Now it's quite simple. Until you get to a difference of 100 yards, there's no need to post a temporary rating or post a manual rating for that set of tees. No need to make an adjustment here. Once you hit 100 yards, there's guidelines in Appendix G that tell you what adjustments need to be made to the course rating when you go to post. It's not something that's common, but certainly if you host a competition and you use a set of combination tees maybe that you have created that doesn't have a rating, this is where you want to use this information in Appendix G. Anything over 300 yards, you should be contacting us for an adjustment over 300 yards, which is uncommon and not something that you'll often run into. Lastly here in Appendix G, just any permanent modifications of your golf course. Obviously we need to know those kind of things so we can make sure you have a proper rating. If it's certain things that are temporary, we can issue temporary ratings, or we can adjust the rating if holes are out of play for a period of time, or if you've got temporary greens, those kind of things. You're doing construction work, and there's a change to the golf course that's significant, needs to be accounted for, just make sure you contact us. We will work through it with you and make sure that your players, members that are playing the course during that time are posting their scores to the proper rating. So just last, want to make sure we go through this, the key definitions again, things to remember. Low handicap index, it's a low over the rolling 365-day period. The hard and soft cap, those are one of the two safeguards in place, automatically calculated, and they're measured against that low handicap index. Playing conditions calculation, that was a procedure to evaluate course and or weather conditions on day of play that will make adjustments to a player score differential on that day. Exceptional score reduction, that automatically triggers in if a player posts a score that's at least 7.0 strokes better than the player's handicap index at the time the round was played. Net double bogey is a maximum score hole for handicap purposes. That's always par +2 plus any handicap strokes applied. And then finally net par, new term for par plus, it is par plus any strokes player receives in that hole, and that's used for a hole that is not played. Last slide we got for you, where we'll take any final questions, is just education overview. Everybody's been sent a digital copy of the rules of handicapping. Like Collin mentioned earlier, you can find that on our website under the Keep Score tab. At the bottom, we've got a page called just World Handicap System. If you click in there, we've got a number of resources. We got the full text of the rules. We've got videos, infographics there you can look at as well, especially if you have members of your club who are curious. That's an easy place to put them or point them to, where they can go through and they can kind of digest things on their own. Like I said, videos there, lots of infographics and information, as well as online articles. And as Collin mentioned too, we will send everyone a hard copy of the Rules of Handicapping book, so they have that as well. We appreciate everyone's time today. If you do have further questions, don't hesitate to give us a call or to send Collin or myself an email. We are happy to help, and appreciate it, guys. Thank you.